Nós estamos no abrigo do Lagar Velho, no Vale do Lapedo, a cerca de 150 km a norte de Lisboa, e é aqui que foi descoberto a famosa criança do Lapedo, em 1998. Foi aqui que foi, há 29 mil anos, depositado o corpo desta criança.
During the excavation, we had noted that there were some weird aspects of the child's anatomy. When we found the mandible, we knew that this was going to be a modern human child. And when we exposed the entire skeleton and started to look at it, this modern human child with a very nice chin has some, Neanderthal body proportions. Something strange is going on here, right? The only thing that made sense to explain the combination of features was that this child, in fact, was evidence for Neanderthal and modern humans having admixed. If you put yourself back in how people thought about human evolution in the late 1990s, Neanderthals and modern humans were supposed to be different species, and therefore interbreeding was out of the question. 90% of our colleagues were of the opinion that we were, just a bit crazy, in proposing such an interpretation.
Estamos a lidar com comunidades humanas de caçadores-recoletores, que são por natureza nómadas. O grupo abriu uma depressão no solo, queimou uma ramada de pinheiro silvestre e é sobre essas cinzas que é depositada a criança. Ela vai embrulhada numa mortalha tingida com ocre. Não se sabe se era um rapaz, se era uma rapariga. Embora haja alguns indícios que pudesse ser, de facto, do sexo masculino, mas a criança não apresentava no seu esqueleto qualquer indício que nos pudesse apontar uma determinada doença ou uma queda. Não havia nada disso. Podemos imaginar múltiplos cenários, que a criança terá comido um cogumelo, terá morrido afogada.
Los huesos del niño de 4 años permanecieron bajo tierra durante varios milenios, hasta que fueron descubiertos por casualidad.
Este sítio onde nós estamos não era um sítio arqueológico em 1998. O proprietário deste terreno resolveu fazer uma terraplanagem, colocou uma retroescavadora que removeu os sedimentos que se encontravam a 2 e a 3 metros acima de onde eu estou.
For sheer luck, the terracing of the site stopped within 2 inches, 5 centimeters of the burial. And the machine doing the work hit the cranium, the skull, broke it and it scattered it in the surrounding area. But otherwise, the burial pit was intact and the skeleton was found almost, 90% complete. Once the salvage operation was complete, the bones were removed to the National Museum in Lisbon, where we are today, and their study began. The leg bones were shorter than they should be for a child that age. How come the legs look like a Neanderthal? Some of the teeth look like Neanderthal, the others look like modern human. How do you explain this?
Había 2 hipótesis para las características mixtas. Primero, que el niño fue resultado de un mestizaje único entre un Neandertal y un humano moderno.
But we were not very convinced if this were such a unique, rare, sporadic event. The chances of us, 30,000 years later, finding that one event were, like the chances of finding life on some planet.
La segunda hipótesis fue que los neandertales y los sapiens se apareaban de forma regular.
We knew that in the Iberian Peninsula, the time of contact was somewhat later than north of the Pyrenees, about 37,000 years ago. So if the skeleton dated to about that, the first hypothesis could work. But if the child turned out to be much later in time, then the implication necessarily had to be that we were dealing with a process at the population level, not 2 individuals randomly encountering it.
La datación por radiocarbono proporcionó la respuesta. El Niño de Lapedo tenía 29.000 años.
If so many millennia after the time of contact, people living in this part of the world still bore anatomical evidence of this ancestral Neanderthal population, the implication had to be that interbreeding did not just happen, was the norm. The fact that we had such solid evidence forced people to think about what we were saying. It was not just, an isolated bone, something that could be, explained by many different alternative interpretations. This was a complete skeleton.
El descubrimiento también desencadenó un cambio en nuestra comprensión de quiénes eran los neandertales como especie.
Basically, the implication is Neanderthals were not a different species. We've been over-interpreting the minor differences in the facial skeleton or in robustness of the skeleton. This very popular notion, which is still very much around, that Neanderthals were some, form of retarded brutes that have nothing to do with humans.
Descubrimientos posteriores de fósiles con características similares al Niño de Lapedo fortalecieron la teoría de la mezcla y se reforzó aún más después de que los investigadores secuenciaron el genoma neandertal completo. Así es como sabemos que los europeos y los asiáticos pueden tener hasta un 4% de ADN neandertal.
That does not mean that in every one of us that 2 to 4% is the same. In fact, if you pull together all the parts of the Neanderthal genome that are still around, that's almost like 50 to 70% of what was specifically Neanderthal. So the Neanderthal genome has persisted almost in its entirety. Consideration of this ancestry enriches our understanding of human evolution. Whereas saying, no, we only descend from a very tiny, small population that 250,000 years ago lived somewhere in Africa, and everybody else who lived at the time just disappeared, vanished.
Es probable que surjan más piezas del rompecabezas de la evolución a medida que se realicen más trabajos en esta zona.
The discipline of prehistory and the Paleolithic in particular developed first in Central and Northern Europe, and so we still have an image of what those peoples were like that is based in the archaeological record from France, Germany, Austria. In reality, it's a distorted image. The Paleolithic peoples of France and Germany were like the Eskimo of their time. Most people lived to the south because it was more sheltered from the cold climates, and also it was less affected by the sea level rise that started taking place 10,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age. But in Iberia in particular, investigations started much later and grew slowly, and it's only in the last quarter of a century that we're starting to make discoveries that change everything.
Investigaciones posteriores en el valle de Lapedo revelaron que el entierro del niño no fue un hecho aislado. La zona estaba habitada por cazadores-recolectores entre 29.000 y 24.000 años atrás.
Este sítio é vale em canhão, tem paredes verticais muito altas e por isso mesmo são muito protegidas. Seria lugar muito apelativo, não é? Há abrigo, há água e há animais, que são os animais que as pessoas viriam aqui caçar. Aqui podem ver um osso que é uma mandíbula de veado, que ainda ficou aqui preservada no perfil. Saíram cerca de 20.000 restos que nós temos agora de estudar para tentar compreender melhor qual era a ocupação que teve aqui o lugar. Temos os instrumentos utilizados para o esquartejamento, o tratamento das carcaças. Temos indícios de fogo de grandes lareiras que estavam relacionadas com essas atividades domésticas. É uma honra para nós não só ter participado nesses trabalhos, mas sobretudo continuar a desvendar o que este abrigo tem escondido, não é, por baixo destes sedimentos.
The most important thing that is going to happen in the next decades is that there will be a lot more fossils found in many geographical areas that so far have been, like black holes. When we have a more complete record of temporal and geographic variation, we will have a much better understanding even than what we have today.